Please subscribe the channel, like, and share the video for more video. Hey everyone, tonight, we're drifting back into the soft-lit corridors of the ancient and medieval world. A world of echoing marble halls, heavy curtains, and dynasties quietly unraveling under their own weight. So get comfortable, lower the volume just a little more than you think you need. Let your eyes rest. This is history designed not to excite you, but to gently escort you towards sleep. We'll be talking about power, status, and prestige tonight, and how all three were often guarded by men who were, very deliberately, denied a future of their own. Because tonight, we begin with your life as a eunuch. Now, this is not a role anyone applied for. There was no application process, no interview, no polite rejection email. Your career path began with someone else making a permanent decision on your behalf. Naturally, they told themselves it was for the greater good. Let's begin slowly. You are born into a world where lineage is everything. Bloodlines are guarded with the intensity of paranoid dragons. Royal families are deeply concerned about who is sleeping with whom, who might produce heirs, and perhaps most importantly, who absolutely must not. And that's where you come in. Because rulers, being rulers, wanted servants they could trust, not because of loyalty, not because of virtue, but because of biology. You were made safe, permanently. The logic, if we're being generous, was simple. A eunuch could not father children, which meant no secret heirs, no rival bloodlines, no awkward. Well, actually, that's the king's son's situations 20 years later. And so, throughout history in Byzantium, China, the Islamic Caliph, and imperial courts stretching from Rome to the Forbidden City, eunuchs became fixtures of elite life. Invisible, indispensable, and quietly miserable. Let's imagine your early years. You probably don't remember the procedure itself, which is, frankly, a small mercy. It often happened when you were very young, sometimes as an infant, sometimes as a boy old enough to understand exactly what was being taken from you. The methods varied, the outcomes rarely improved. Survival was not guaranteed, infection was common, pain was constant, and if you lived, congratulations, you are now qualified for palace service. History, as usual, moves briskly past this part. As you grow older, your body does something unusual, or rather, it doesn't do what it is supposed to. Your voice remains high. Your face stays smooth. Your limbs lengthen awkwardly. You exist in a category all your own, neither child nor fully adult. By the standards of the time, people stare, they whisper, they laugh, sometimes, and yet they also bow. Because despite everything, you are close to power, very close. Let's drift over to the palace itself. The palace is warm. It smells of incense, polished stone, and quiet fear. And fear is the key ingredient here, because rulers are terrified people. They are surrounded by relatives who want their throne, generals who might decide they'd make a better king, and spouses who absolutely have opinions. The eunuch, however, is different. You pose no dynastic threat. You cannot marry into power. You cannot found a rival house. You are safe, so safe, in fact, that you're allowed into spaces no one else is. You guard the women's quarters. You manage wardrobes. You carry messages whispered behind curtains. You know who is pregnant before the king does. You know who is lying about it. You know who is sneaking into whose chambers. And most importantly, you know which secrets could end the empire. This knowledge gives you power. A strange, quiet power. Not the kind sung about in epics, but the kind that makes emperors nervous. In Byzantine Constantinople, eunuchs rose to astonishing heights. They became generals, administrators, patriarchs of the church. One emperor, Leo VI, even complained somewhat bitterly that eunuchs were running everything, which is always a good sign that they were. Byzantine society, oddly enough, treated eunuchs as a third gender. Not quite men, not women, something else entirely. They could not inherit normally, but they could hold office. They could command armies. They could shape theology. They could, and often did, outmaneuver everyone else in the room. Of course, this made them deeply unpopular. Chroniclers loved to blame eunuchs for political disasters. Lost wars, eunuchs. Bad tax policy, eunuch. A general case of imperial incompetence. Also, eunuchs, it was convenient. They were already outsiders, and history loves a scapegoat who can't easily fight back. Let's drift eastward now. To imperial China. Here, eunuchs became an entire bureaucratic ecosystem. The Forbidden City was, as the name suggests, extremely forbidden, except to eunuchs. They ran the palace workshops, They handled imperial correspondence. They controlled access to the emperor himself. And over time, this became a problem. Because when an emperor was young, disinterested, or frankly bad at his job, which happened often, the eunuchs stepped in. Not officially, of course. Officially, they were just servants. Unofficially, they were running the state. One famous example is Wei Zhongshan, a Ming dynasty eunuch who rose from obscurity to absolute dominance. He controlled appointments. He silenced critics. He installed allies everywhere. People bowed to him. Officials flattered him. Statues were erected in his honor, all while everyone insisted he was merely a humble servant. Naturally, this ended badly. When the political winds shifted, Wei was forced into exile, and then politely encouraged to commit suicide, which he did. History moved on. The palace found new eunuchs. The system remained, and that's the strange irony of your life as a eunuch. You are simultaneously indispensable and disposable. You may rise incredibly high, but you never truly belong. No family name carries you forward. No descendants remember you kindly. Your legacy is paperwork, footnotes, and the occasional furious rant by a court historian who absolutely did not get the promotion you did. Emotionally, life is complicated. Some eunuchs formed deep friendships. Others adopted children unofficially. Some became intensely religious. Many struggled with identity, with loneliness, with the quiet understanding that their lives had been shaped by a decision they never made. But history rarely pauses to reflect on that. Instead, it lists their titles, their intrigues, their downfall. And so, as we let this first chapter fade, imagine yourself walking softly through a palace corridor late at night. The torches flicker. The stone is cool beneath your feet. You carry secrets that could shatter kingdoms. And yet, you are utterly alone. This is your life as a eunuch. A life of proximity without belonging, power without legacy, trust without affection. And as we drift onward, we'll see how this strange arrangement shaped the rulers you served and how, quite often, they managed to make everything worse. Anyway, for now, take a breath. Let the palace lights dim. And when you're ready, we'll drift gently into the next royal misadventure. Alright, if you're still awake, or at least awake enough to vaguely register words, let's drift onward. We're leaving the quiet corridors of palace servants now, and floating gently into the candlelit bedchambers of Europe's ruling families. This is where history becomes deeply personal, and deeply uncomfortable. Because tonight, we're talking about royal marriages. Specifically the ones that should never have happened. The ones that involved cousins, nieces, uncles, aunts, and the occasional, technically this is allowed if the Pope says yes, and of course so the Pope usually said yes. Royal marriage was not about love. It was not about compatibility. It was not even really about liking one another. It was about land, titles, alliances, and above all, keeping power in the family, which sounds sensible at first, until you remember how genetics works. Let's begin slowly with the House of Habsburg, because naturally, we have to. The Habsburgs were masters of dynastic strategy. They didn't conquer through war as much as through weddings. Their unofficial motto was, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." And marry they did. Mostly each other. Generation after generation, Habsburgs married cousins, second cousins, first cousins. Sometimes uncles married nieces. This was not an accident. This was policy. They believed quite sincerely that keeping bloodlines pure would preserve their divine right to rule. What it actually preserved was a collection of increasingly alarming medical conditions. Let's drift towards Spain, where this strategy reached its final, tragic form. Meet Charles II of Spain, nicknamed cruelly, but accurately, the Bewitched. Charles was the result of centuries of inbreeding. His family tree was less a tree and more a decorative wreath. By the time he was born, his parents shared so many ancestors that his genetic diversity was minimal. Charles struggled from infancy. He couldn't walk properly until late childhood. He had trouble speaking. He suffered seizures, chronic illness, developmental delays. His jaw, the famous Habsburg jaw, was so pronounced that chewing was difficult. His tongue reportedly barely fit in his mouth, which makes you wonder how anyone looked at this situation and thought, yes, this is working. Naturally, Charles was married twice, in fact, because if there was one thing Spain needed, it was an heir. Despite everyone quietly knowing this was Unlikely. Both marriages were unhappy. Neither produced children. Charles himself seemed perpetually confused, often exhausted, frequently ill, and entirely unprepared to rule a global empire. When he died in 1700, childless and worn down, the Spanish Habsburg line ended with him, and Europe immediately erupted into war. Because of course it did. But the Habsburgs were not alone. Oh no! They were merely the most dedicated. Let's drift north to England. The Tudors were not quite as genetically tangled, but they certainly had their own issues. Henry VIII, for example, was desperate for a male heir. Desperate enough to marry 6 times. Desperate enough to behead 2 wives. And still, his genetic legacy was complicated. Many historians now believe Henry carried a genetic condition that caused his wives to suffer repeated which is tragically ironic, given how aggressively he blamed them for failing to produce sons. Because naturally, it was never his fault. His surviving children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, each struggled with health in different ways. Edward VI died young. Mary suffered chronic illness and phantom pregnancies. Elizabeth never married at all. The Tudor line quietly extinguished itself. And England, once again, found itself reorganizing the monarchy around the consequences of biology. Let's drift back to the continent, to France, where royal marriages were lavish, public spectacles. But behind the silks and tapestries, things were often bleak. Take Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. Married young, politically necessary, emotionally distant. They spent years barely speaking, years avoiding one another. It took over 2 decades for them to produce an heir, and only after intense pressure, medical interventions, and an alarming level of state involvement in their private lives, when their son, Louis XIV, was finally born. He was treated as a miracle, which, considering the circumstances, was fair. But this obsession with producing heirs came at a cost. Royal women were pressured into near-constant pregnancy. Miscarriage was common. Childbirth was dangerous, and the emotional toll was rarely acknowledged. Which brings us to childhood. Royal childhood. And this is where things get quietly heartbreaking. Royal children were not raised like other children. They were assets, symbols, future rulers or bargaining chips. From birth, their lives were monitored, documented, and controlled, and many of them never stood a chance. Infant mortality was high, even in palaces, especially in palaces, sometimes where medical practices were enthusiastic, bloodletting, purging, prayer. When a royal child fell ill, everyone panicked. And panic rarely improves medical outcomes. Those who survived often grew up isolated, surrounded by tutors, servants, guards, rarely allowed to play with other children, rarely allowed to be children at all. Affection was formal. Discipline was strict. Love was conditional. Some were spoiled beyond reason. Every whim indulged. Every bad habit reinforced. Others were emotionally neglected, treated as future responsibilities rather than people. Either way, the result was often the same. Adults who ruled empires with the emotional maturity of deeply anxious children. And when we look at the pettiest, most dysfunctional monarchs, the ones who obsessed over slights, lashed out at critics, or spiraled into paranoia, we often find the same quiet pattern. Lonely childhoods, unstable families, and immense pressure from birth. But we'll save those rulers for later. For now, let your thoughts slow. Imagine the quiet of a nursery in a medieval palace. Heavy curtains, a single candle, a child sleeping, already burdened with a crown they haven't earned, and a future they can't escape. History moves forward. Dynasties rise and fall, and somehow, they keep making the same mistakes. When you're ready, we'll drift gently into the next chapter, where power meets pet, and monarchs prove that absolute authority rarely improves anyone's personality. But for now, rest. Alright? Let's keep drifting. No sudden movements, no sharp turns, just a slow glide forward into the gently disappointing personalities of people who ruled entire nations and somehow still managed to be spectacularly small. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that absolute power does not create wisdom. It mostly just amplifies existing personality flaws. Quietly, relentlessly, and nowhere is this clearer than in the private grievances of kings and queens. Let's start with something familiar. Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Radiant, magnificent, draped in silk, gold, and confidence. And also Deeply sensitive, Louis ruled for 72 years. That's long enough to become the human equivalent of a very ornate piece of furniture. By the end of his reign, he barely remembered a time when he wasn't king, which meant that, emotionally, criticism felt like treason, and disagreement felt personal. Louis demanded constant attention. He structured court life around himself. Who got to watch him wake up? Who got to hand him his shirt? Who got to stand close enough to be noticed? These rituals were not symbolic. They were psychological. If you were near the king, you mattered. If you weren't, you slowly faded into a... Naturally, this turned the French court into a competitive anxiety factory. Louis also held grudges. Small ones, petty ones, long-lasting ones. If you embarrassed him once, even accidentally, you might find your career quietly stalled for decades. No confrontation. No dramatic punishment. Justa gently eternal sidelining. Which, honestly, might be worse. Now let's drift to England, to King James VI of Scotland, also James I of England, a man who believed deeply in the divine right of kings, and even more deeply in his own intellectual brilliance. James loved to lecture, on politics, on theology, on absolutely anything, often for hours. Unprompted, he fancied himself a philosopher king, a scholar, a writer. He authored treatises on monarchy, witchcraft, and how everyone else should behave. This would have been charming if he had also been competent. But James was difficult. He disliked bathing. He slouched. He drooled when he talked, which did not stop him from insisting on respect at all times. James also had favorites. Very obvious favorites. Young men at court who received titles, lands, and wealth with suspicious speed. This caused endless resentment, endless gossip, and endless parliamentary frustration. James, for his part, could not understand why everyone else was so obsessed with appearances, which is always a bold stance for a king. Now let's move east, to Russia. Specifically, to Peter the Great. Peter was tall, energetic, restless, and profoundly intense. Peter despised weakness, in himself, in others, in tradition. He wanted to modernize Russia, and if people resisted, he simply removed them. Sometimes metaphorically, sometimes literally. Peter famously forced his nobles to shave their beards. This may sound trivial. It was not. Beards were symbols of tradition, faith, and identity. Peter taxed them, mocked them, cut them off himself, because nothing says reform like personally humiliating your aristocracy. Peter also enjoyed practical jokes, violent ones. He staged fake executions, forced people into humiliating performances, dragged courtiers into drunken chaos. He called this bonding. Others called it terrifying. And yet, Peter was effective, which makes him unsettling in a different way. History likes results, even when they come at a cost. Let's slow things down again. Not all dysfunction was loud. Some of it was quiet, passive, endlessly resentful. Consider Queen Isabella II of Spain. Married at 16 to a cousin she despised. Their marriage was unhappy from the start, publicly hostile, privately bitter. Isabella took lovers, many of them, which, in any other context, might be unremarkable. But this was a queen, producing heirs of uncertain paternity in a deeply conservative court. Naturally, everyone noticed. The court whispered, the public judged. Politicians maneuvered. Isabella responded by retreating into indulgence, defensiveness, and increasingly erratic behavior. Her reign became unstable. Her authority weakened. Eventually, she was deposed. History labeled her incompetent, which is fair, but also incomplete, because so many of these rulers were shaped by forces they never chose. Arranged marriages, isolated childhoods, crushing expectations. And yet, they were still responsible for everything they did, which is the uncomfortable part. Now let's tie this gently together. Eunuchs guarding secrets. Royal marriages twisting bloodlines. Children raised as symbols. Adults ruling with unresolved resentment. This is not coincidence. It's a system that prioritized continuity over image over health, power over humanity, and then acted surprised when things went wrong. So as we slow the pace even further, imagine a throne room late at night, empty, silent. The crown rests on a cushion, heavy, unyielding. The ruler is alone, surrounded by luxury, and deeply, profoundly dissatisfied. History remembers their titles, their wars, their portraits. It rarely remembers how tired they were, and that's where we'll rest for now. Let your breathing slow, let the palace fade. In the next part, we'll drift into the quieter tragedies, the rulers who wanted peace, who tried to be kind and were punished for it. But for now, sleep is allowed. Alright. Welcome back. Or perhaps you never really left. Either way, let's continue slowly, carefully, into the lives of rulers who were, by historical standards, a little too soft for the job. Because while history often mocks tyrants and monsters, it has a quieter cruelty reserved for monarchs who tried to be decent in systems that punish decency relentlessly. And there were many. Let's begin with Henry VI of England. Henry became king at 9 months old, which is, as you might imagine, not an ideal age for governance. As he grew, it became clear that Henry was not built for power. He was gentle, deeply religious, conflict-averse. He preferred prayer to politics, peace to war, and quiet reflection to shouting matchas with nobles, which, unfortunately, made him catastrophic as a medieval king. England, at the time, expected its monarch to be forceful, decisive, slightly terrifying. Henry was none of these things. He avoided confrontation. He trusted the wrong people. He withdrew when stressed, and when pressure mounted, as it always does, his mind simply shut down. Henry suffered repeated mental breakdowns, long periods where he was unresponsive, unable to speak, unable to recognize his own family. During these episodes, others ruled in his name. Badly. Factions formed. Rivalries hardened, and eventually, England descended into the Wars of the Roses. A dynastic bloodbath, sparked in no small part by a king who just wanted everyone to get along. History often labels Henry as weak, incapable, useless, which is true politically. But emotionally, he may have been one of the few rulers who genuinely didn't want power. And that, in a monarchy, is unforgivable. Let's drift gently to France now, to Louis XVI. Another ruler profoundly unsuited to the role he inherited. Louis XVI was not stupid. He was not cruel. He was not especially vain. He was awkward. He loved locks. Mechanical ones. He spent hours tinkering with them, studying their mechanisms, fixing tiny imperfections, which is a lovely hobby, just not one that helps when your country is collapsing. Louis struggled with decision-making. He delayed. He hesitated. He tried to please everyone, which pleased no one. As France faced financial ruin, social unrest, and revolutionary fervor, he made half reforms, then reversed them, then apologized. The people lost patience. When the revolution came, Louis did not fight it aggressively. He didn't flee decisively. He didn't seize control. He drifted, and history, much like politics, is unkind to drifters. Eventually, Louis was arrested, put on trial, and executed. Not because he was monstrous, but because he was ineffective at a moment when effectiveness was the only thing that mattered. Now let's slow down even more, because not all quiet rulers met dramatic ends. Some simply faded. Consider Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, a deeply introverted man, melancholic, obsessed with art, astrology, and alchemy. Rudolf preferred collecting paintings to ruling an empire. He avoided meetings, ignored correspondence, delayed decisions indefinitely. Meanwhile, religious tensions simmered, political alliances fractured. The empire weakened. Rudolf withdrew further, locked himself away, surrounded by scholars, mystics, and animals. At one point, he kept lions in the castle, because of course he did. Eventually, his family intervened. They stripped him of power, gently, but firmly. Rudolf lived out his days surrounded by his collections, largely irrelevant, which, honestly, might have been exactly what he wanted. And that's the strange truth of monarchy. Some people thrive under absolute power. Others are crushed by it, and a few never wanted it at all. But the crown does not care. It passes to whoever is next, ready or not. So as we prepare to drift onward, imagine a ruler sitting alone in a quiet chamber. The weight of expectation presses down, the crown gleams softly in candlelight, and somewhere, deep down, they wish they could set it aside. Just for a moment, just to breathe. In the next part, we'll drift into the final, quiet irony. What happens after the crown is gone, when monarchs are remembered, misremembered, or quietly forgotten. But for now, let your thoughts soften. History will wait.